If you've been following news over the last couple of years, you've probably come across the term Abraham Accords. In 2020, the United States brokered agreements that brought Israel into open diplomatic ties with some of the Arab countries. So initially it was UAE and Bahrain, and later they were joined by Morocco and Sudan.
The President of the United States, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and His Highness, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the United Arab Emirates, will sign a treaty of peace, diplomatic relations, and full normalization.
These agreements were hailed as breakthrough for peace in the region. Everybody thought this would be it. The long-awaited accords required for stability at the time. The beginning of cordial relationships in a region that had seen decades of conflict. So the Abraham Accords were really sold as that turning point. Israel, it was said, would finally moderate its behavior under international pressure.
The blessings of the peace we make today will be enormous. First, because this peace will eventually expand to include other Arab states, and ultimately it can end the Arab-Israeli conflict once and for all. Second, because the great economic benefits of our partnership will be felt throughout our region. And third, because this is not only a peace between leaders, it's a peace between peoples.
That was the theory, that was the promise, but reality tore that illusion apart very early on. What was presented as a peace deal in practice allowed Israel to normalize relations with Arab countries while simultaneously turning Gaza into an open graveyard. And this is the betrayal that I want to talk about at the heart of this story. And then I want to talk about Pakistan's situation. Ours is a country founded on the principles that rejected the partition of Palestine. Our passports still carry the explicit declaration of being valid for the world, with the exception of Israel. The public sentiment in Pakistan leaves little room for ambiguity. But then, why are the debates around normalization quietly resurfacing again? So in this episode, we're going to walk through one of the most sensitive, I would say, and often misunderstood debates in Pakistan's foreign policy: our relationship with Israel. As per the US Department of State's website, this is what is stated about the Abraham Accords. We, the undersigned, recognize the importance of maintaining and strengthening peace in the Middle East and around the world, based on mutual understanding and coexistence, as well as respect for human dignity and freedom, including religious freedom. We encourage efforts to promote interfaith and intercultural dialogue to advance a culture of peace among the three Abrahamic religions and all humanity. We believe that the best way to address challenges is through cooperation and dialogue, and that developing friendly relations among states advances the interests of lasting peace in the Middle East and around the world. Then it goes on to say, in this spirit, we warmly welcome and are encouraged by the progress already made in establishing diplomatic relations between Israel and its neighbors in the region under the principles of the Abraham Accords. Before we get into how did the four Muslim countries become signatories to this, let's quickly look at where we are in 2025. Gaza is a scarred wasteland. The strip is no longer functioning. It has been bombarded into dust. Famine is not a looming threat anymore. It is there as per the IPC. Millions are on the brink of starvation. Hospitals have turned into graveyards. Those who have survived are hardly alive with mutilated bodies and minds so tormented that survival looks worse than death. Doctors are killed in wards, journalists and rescue teams are bombed live on air. And the looming question for millions of people around the world raising their voice against it is that why can't anyone stop these horrors? How can they not? Where is the Muslim world? Why can't Arabs take a stand? At least by walking out of the Abraham Accords, if not more. Why have Muslims in general, and specifically the Emiratis and the Saudis, two of the most powerful actors in the region and the world, not done enough in the face of this? These questions reflect the frustration of ordinary Muslims like me, ordinary human beings actually like me. And to make sense of why the UAE and others continue to hold fast to the Abraham Accords, we should look beyond the surface to understand what is it. The circumstances that led to the signing, the larger geopolitical economic stakes, the position of states such as Pakistan, which maintains to refuse or recognize Israel, but what's happening behind the scenes. The core and most consequential signatories of these accords remain the UAE and Bahrain, with the UAE clearly taking the lead.
It's not our first time here, but it's always a privilege to come and to present the capability that we demonstrated just lately. Gaza war is something that is being handled by IDF, Israel Defense Forces. Of course, some of our products are there.
The Gulf monarchies at the beginning had been less concerned with the liberation of Palestine than with the rise of Iran after 1979. Sectarian politics and the Sunni-Shia divide had essentially shaped politics far more than the question of Jerusalem. Now, Qatar and Turkey have positions as Muslim Brotherhood affiliates supporting popular legitimacy and the causes of oppressed Muslims. But this has been read by Saudi Arabia and UAE as a direct ideological threat for the Emirati and Saudi leaderships. Such Qurans have not been seen as mere political competitors, but really as existential dangers capable of destabilizing hereditary monarchies. The Gulf Cooperation Council's internal rift basically came to light in 2017. This was the time when Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and a few more countries imposed a sweeping blockade on Qatar. So they shut the land, the sea, the air, and they were demanding that Doha shut Al Jazeera, sever ties with Iran, expel figures linked to Muslim Brotherhood or those alliances. So this blockade, in a sense, failed, but this also exposed a very deep divide inside the Gulf. So there was one camp that was defining stability as the elimination of movements or alliances they saw as threats and aligning themselves more closely with the United States and Israel. The other was insisting on engagement with the same actors as a source of leverage and mediation. After the recent Israel-Iran war, one may also wonder, how does Qatar reconcile this paradox? How does it manage to be US's indispensable ally while simultaneously sheltering the actors the US and its Arab partners denounce? For just a bit of a context here, Qatar is a small state which is sitting in the shadow of two giants, Saudi Arabia and Iran. It shares the world's largest natural gas field, which is South Par's North Dome, with Iran, which makes cooperation with Iran unavoidable. At the same time, Qatar's security is too fragile to rely solely on Iran's goodwill. So it has to strike a sort of a balancing act. And that is exactly what it's doing. A gas partnership with Iran keeps its economy secure. Hosting the largest US military base in the Middle East, Al Udeid Air Base, ensures American protection. So this dual posture is deliberate. By allowing the US base, Qatar has bought itself a sort of a survival guarantee and insurance. So I think, in other words, it's one country that has mastered the art of playing both sides, which is a risky strategy, but one that has kept it independent against much larger neighbors. So it was this clash, basically, the clash of visions, that explains why the UAE became the first to normalize ties with Israel under the Abraham Accords. It was this landscape of divide, fragmentation, where Donald Trump, who was a businessman, found his opening, and with this transactional worldview, he realized that the Arabs weren't one bloc. The UAE was a natural candidate to move first. It was wealthy, it was ambitious, but it was insecure in the shadow of Iran's influence in the Muslim world. Trump sort of dangled incentives, advanced US weapon systems, political capital, and the prestige of being framed as a peacemaker. So Abu Dhabi took the deal. The supposed legal justification was, at the time, Israel's suspension of annexation of the West Bank. But the real calculus was really breaking taboos to secure alliances that would contain Iran while cementing Emirati influence in Washington. So basically, everybody had their own reasons. This was UAE's. In Bahrain's case, Bahrain is really, really dependent on the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So its decision to sign the Abraham Accords was more to do with this particular bloc's leaning towards US. It would have never moved forward, according to analysts, without Riyadh's blessing. So it followed UAE's lead, basically joining the Accords out of necessity, essentially, to maintain Gulf solidarity. Morocco's decision to join the Abraham Accords was directly tied to the US recognizing its sovereignty over the Western Sahara, which was a disputed territory. It's basically a former Spanish colony claimed by Morocco since 1975, but it is also home to the Algeria-backed Polisario Front, which demands independence. The UN classifies it as a non-self-governing territory, and most of the world hasn't recognized Moroccan sovereignty over it. So the deal essentially was, as part of the Abraham Accords, the Trump administration brokered Morocco's normalization with Israel. Sudan's case was very different from the Gulf monarchies. Sudan had been on the US list of state sponsors of terrorism since the 1990s because of hosting Osama bin Laden and basically its ties to extremist groups. And this label, this designation, crippled its economy for decades. It blocked the debt relief, the IMF aid, international investment. So Sudan's economy was really going through an extremely fragile transition, especially after the ouster of Umar al-Bashir in 2019. The transitional government was struggling with protests, hyperinflation, food shortages. So normalization became a bargaining chip for unlocking money, basically. So it was really desperate to be removed from Washington's terror blacklist, basically. This was Sudan's backdrop. Then I think Sudan's army also held a very significant position and were particularly receptive to Gulf persuasion. But unlike the UAE or Bahrain, its normalization was highly unpopular in Sudan. The public opinion and the Islamist groups opposed it. So in Sudan's case, I think it was more symbolic than actually normalizing the relationship. Why not Saudi Arabia? Well, I think Saudis cannot risk it. It's too big of a risk for them. Riyadh cannot afford to openly normalize while still claiming the custodianship of Makkah and Medina. It risks enraging the wider Muslim world, testing public reactions. Who knows? Who knows? But I think this kingdom status at the moment is that they cannot at this point. So now you see, it was never really about peace for any of them. It was more like a marketplace of concessions where Palestine was a sort of a currency bought and sold without ever really being on the table. This becomes even clearer when you actually look at the trade numbers. So the UAE signed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, CEPA, with Israel. In terms of trade, this is where these countries stand with Israel. UAE-Israel trade surged to over $6.4 billion from 2021 to 2024. Morocco-Israel trade reached about $576 million. Bahrain-Israel trade barely crossed $50 million. Crucially, Israel has run a trade deficit with all three. With the UAE, that deficit was more than $2.1 billion across these years. So the answer to why the UAE doesn't step away from the Accords is here, that the UAE benefits economically and strategically. Let's talk about Pakistan-Israel relationship now. From the very beginning, Jinnah was very clear. In 1945, he said that every man and woman of the Muslim world will die before Jewry seizes Jerusalem. That clarity has carried through decades. Yet governments have tried from time to time to normalize these relationships, or at least attempted, but every attempt has failed. Why? Because the people of Pakistan have never allowed it. 1947 to 48, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Pakistan's founder, opposed the creation of Israel and advocated for Palestinian rights. Pakistan voted against Israel UN membership in 1949. Actually, even before that, the All India Muslim League was against it from the very beginning, a very strong voice against the Balfour Declaration as well. So that has been the official position of Pakistan right from the beginning. I want to read an excerpt from an Israeli research paper written by P.R. Kumaraswamy for an Israeli think tank, Jaffe Center for Strategic Studies, JCSS. Here they're talking about a UN session that was supposed to decide the partition of Palestine. They say, Pakistan was represented by its able and articulate foreign minister Sir Zafarullah Khan. Capitalizing on his legal background, he vehemently argued that the UN had no legal or juridical authority to partition Palestine. He led the group of Islamic countries that opposed the partition of Palestine, and when this attempt failed, he sought to limit the size of the proposed Jewish state. Had this amendment been accepted, he argued, the area of the Jewish state would have been reduced practically to the lands which the Jews owned. That is to say, it would have given the Jews only 40% of what is now being included within the Jewish state, that it would have been made the constitution of an independent Jewish state practically impossible. Zafarullah Khan thus became the most articulate opponent of the partition plan. Pakistan also voted against Israel's admission into the UN. Within days after its formation, Israel formally requested Pakistan's recognition. The request went unanswered. From the early 1980s, Israel perceived Pakistan's burgeoning nuclear program as an urgent strategic threat, as a growing reality. By 1984 to 85, Israel had escalated from strategic apprehension to clandestine action. Jonathan Pollard, a US naval intelligence analyst spying for Israel, passed a trove of highly sensitive American documents to his handlers. Among them were detailed files on Pakistan's plutonium reprocessing facility, key to understanding Pakistan's bomb-building capabilities. This intelligence collection provided Israel with concrete insights into Pakistan's nuclear infrastructure and timeline. Meanwhile, the US, entangled in Cold War priorities and reliant on Pakistan's support in Afghanistan, couldn't do much. The Sharif governments in the past have also tried doing this in their tenures. In an interview, Maulana Ajmal Qadri has actually confessed on air that Nawaz Sharif sent him to Israel to explore trade relations, and he was very passionate about developing ties with them. Earlier in an interview, researcher Noor Dahri had claimed that former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif during his tenure had sent 2 delegations to Israel in a bid to normalize these relationships. Now, this one's very interesting. This was the year 1994. Mohatarma Benazir Bhutto was the Prime Minister of Pakistan at the time, and she sought to make a bold diplomatic gesture by visiting the Gaza Strip en route to some UN conference in Cairo. And this was sort of intending to visibly show Pakistan's solidarity with the Palestinians at a moment when the Oslo Accords had raised hopes of a new political chapter. Pakistan's position was very clear that this trip would not imply recognition of Israel, and Islamabad refused to request prior permission from Israeli authorities, because doing so would concede authority it did not acknowledge. This tension sort of escalated when our ambassador was denied entry into the Rafah crossing after making him wait for hours, with Israel insisting on prior coordination under the interim agreements. For Pakistan, obviously, this demand was seen as forcing an indirect recognition of Israel for some sort. So in the end, Benazir cancelled her plan, and she said that, she won't come under any blackmail. So Pakistan, obviously under General Musharraf's rule, was an ally to America in the war on terror. Israel had started withdrawing from Gaza and was seeking to normalize its relationships with key Muslim states. And it was against this backdrop that our foreign minister, Khurshid Qasuri at the time, met with Israel's FM Sylvan Shalom, which marked the first public diplomatic contact between the two countries. For Israel, it was an opening with the only Muslim nuclear power. For Musharraf, however, it was keeping the West happy while insisting recognition of Israel would only follow Palestinian statehood. Domestically, this move was controversial. This has always been controversial. Even an open public discussion, debate about this is also controversial. So obviously it wasn't taken well. Then there were meetings, I believe, in the United States as well following it. But it has never really materialized. During Imran Khan's recent tenure, also, he has been asked multiple times and he has rejected recognition without a Palestinian solution. When we step back and look at the bigger picture, two things become very clear. First, the world's stakes with Israel have far less to do with Israel itself and more to do with the interests of the powerful states. Whether it is the UAE securing the trade routes, Morocco bargaining Western Sahara, the Abraham Accords have never been about peace. They have always been about power and leverage and preservation of self-interests. And second, Pakistan's position is shaped by a much deeper history, which really goes beyond transactional politics. Israel's obsession with Pakistan is obviously not without reason. Since the 1970s, and especially after becoming the only Muslim nuclear power, Pakistan has represented a unique strategic challenge for Israel. That is why Israel often stresses its supposed similarities with Pakistan, trying to play the minority state card in hopes of securing an understanding, or at the very least neutralizing a potential threat. But every attempt by governments from both sides in the past to explore any sorts of ties have not really worked. And like the founding father of this country said, there can be no peace without the end of occupation. I also believe there cannot be any. That founding principle remains alive today. Governments may bend under pressure and, foreign lobbies may lure them with opportunities. But the people of Pakistan will never accept normalization on the ashes of Palestinians or Palestine, especially now, not after the massacres and the famine and the displacement and the absolute horrors. Because conscience does not compromise, unlike politics.
UAE telling CNN that annexation of the West Bank is a red line. This is a significant statement from one of the very few Arab countries that have normalized relations, of course, with Israel. What do you make of it?
Back in 2020, when the UAE agreed to normalize, it was very clear that the goal of that normalization at the time was, partially at least, to prevent Israel from moving forward with plans that it had at the time to annex parts of the West Bank. And so the UAE is now saying that if Israel moves forward with annexation of the West Bank, this would be crossing a red line. It would undermine the vision and the spirit of those Abraham Accords, and could also, they say, shelve these broader prospects of regional integration.